everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the TimeformUS Forecast. This is an outgrowth or a spin-off of the TimeformUS Pacecast that Craig and I do. I should say I'm David Aragona, just to introduce myself, and I'll be joined in just a second by Craig Milkowski, who is the TimeformUS Figuremaker, my co-host for this podcast, also my co-host for the TimeformUS Pacecast. On the Pacecast, we do recapping of races from the past weekend, talk about speed figures, trips horses had. Just to do a nice complement to that, we're going to start handicapping some races on Fridays of the weekend races before the run, and then we'll do the recap on our typical Tuesday afterwards. So handicapping show is something that I'm looking forward to because one of my favorite things is handicapping the races with somebody whose opinion I respect, and I definitely respect Craig's opinion. So, Craig, are you looking forward to doing this?
I am. I'm like you. I mean, it's the reason we're in this game, right? As much as I like making figures, there's nothing better than handicap races and trying to figure out how to win some money.
Let's hope we can do that. We'll see about if that's the case this week with some of the races that we chose to discuss. Obviously, this weekend, the big day of racing is taking place at Parx. It's Pennsylvania Derby Day. They've got a bunch of stakes races they're running on this card. We're going to discuss three of them to begin. After that, we'll talk about some stakes races from Belmont, Laurel, and Charlestown. But getting back to the Parx card, we'll start with the headline attraction, the Pennsylvania Derby. Now, obviously, we already had a scratch from this race announced a couple of days ago as Maximum Security had a setback and is going to be done for the year. So he's not participating in this race, just a field of six. And I think there are three main contenders that most people would focus on, those being Improbable, War of Will, and Mr. Money. Craig, what do you think about this race, and how do you see the pace setting up? Because I think that's one of the major questions is, without Maximum Security in the race, who's going to be setting the pace?
Yeah, I guess you would have to go with Mr. Money. He would probably be my top guess, but I don't think it's set in stone. I mean, there's some horses with some tactical, Improbable, impractical, some speed, and it's just going to be honest, and I don't think the pace is going to determine who wins. I'm with you. The first note I made in here is I think it's a 3-horse race. I'm sure there's some people that could stretch and make a case for Math Wizard, maybe Spun to Run, but I don't really think those horses are serious contenders. I think it's going to come down to, Improbable, War of Will, and Mr. Money.
Yeah, Mr. Money for me is kind of a difficult call, and I think you have to have an opinion about him as you go into this race because he's posted some impressive speed figures, but he's been earning them against some weaker competition, tracks like Mountaineer, Indiana Downs. He proved last time that he can handle the 1.8 distance in that West Virginia Derby, but that was a pretty soft pace scenario, and there really wasn't a whole lot of quality behind him, at least not of the quality of horses he'll be facing in this Pennsylvania Derby. Do you see him handling the step up in class, going this 1.8 distance? I've got to say, at what is likely to be a short price with the scratch of Maximum Security, I respect his ability. I'm just a little bit skeptical that he's got to prove it to me.
Yeah, I'm going to watch the tote board close, and the way I'm going to attack this race is assuming that he's going to take the most money, and I'm going to be against him here, and it's exactly for the reasons you said. I have really big questions about the fields he's been facing. When I went back and just looked at his last, I think it's 4 wins in a row, and you try to find a horse who he beat that is impressive, it's kind of really hard to come up with who's even the best horse that he's beaten. It's just a bunch of second and third tier 3-year-olds. Now, he does have the speed figures, but so do the other horses in here, and they've just been doing it against better horses. So if the betting goes as I expect, I'm probably going to key my bets around Improbable and War of Will, and those two running 1-2, not necessarily in that order.
Yeah, I guess in some ways Improbable is the more likely of the two that you mentioned to win the race because he did earn that pretty gaudy speed figure last time in the shared belief. He was only beating one horse of quality that day, King Jack. We'll talk about in a little bit when we get to the Gallant Bob. But Improbable, I guess the 1.8 is fine for him. He got the distance in the Arkansas Derby earlier in the year. It's not like he ran terribly in the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. I do tend to think he's probably a little bit better going shorter than this. And I didn't love the way he was finishing up in that shared belief. I know they went a good clip early, but he was kind of shutting down at the end of that race when Drayden Van Dyke finally had to get into him. I'm going to go with War of Will as my top pick in this Pennsylvania Derby. I just think he's probably going to be the third choice of these three horses. And he has had some legitimate excuses in his last two starts. Obviously, 1.5 miles might just be beyond the scope of his ideal distance in the Belmont Stakes, but he was also wide against the track that day. A lot of people said that Tacitus had a bad trip because he was wide, and so did War of Will. And then last time out in the Jim Dandy, that was one of those weekends where the rail was just completely dead at Saratoga, especially the case on that Saturday card. They ran the Jim Dandy. And Tyler Gaffalione just sort of got into a position where nobody else wanted to lead. He got War of Will tugged him into the front, and he unfortunately sent him down towards the inside. And you just couldn't be down there on Jim Dandy Day, and he understandably faded at the end of that race. He's trained well into this race. I still think he's got a better performance in him. So I'm going to take War of Will, just hoping he's the third choice of these horses. But I respect all three of them.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I said not necessarily in that order, because War of Will probably wind up being the horse that I would focus on. I think he is the horse that's going to offer the most value in here. And it's for exactly the reason just said. I think you can absolutely draw a line through his last two races. And if after that, he won the Preakness pretty handily. Now, I'll be the first to admit he had the opposite. He had a pretty dream trip that day, but he did it against good horses, and he did it with a good speed figure, a 123 back in early May, which is as good as we've seen from any of these horses. I don't think Mr. Money's he's yet to run that fast, if I remember off the top of my head. He's had some low 120s, but he's right there, but he's been doing it just against not quite as good of horses. So for me, it's War of Will and Improbable, and hope Mr. Money runs out.
I think we pretty much agree on that Pennsylvania Derby. I have those same three in that order. So let's dial it back one race prior to the Cotillion. And to me, this is probably the race that I'm looking forward to the most on this Parx card because, well, you've got some nice horses in the Pennsylvania Derby. We might have some potential champions facing off in this Cotillion. And I think you've got to start with Guarana and how you assess her, and also how you assess her performance in the Coaching Club American Oaks, because I think there are two schools of thought. One is that she just doesn't want to go 1.125 and the distance didn't allow her to run the same kind of speed figure that we saw out of her in the Acorn. The other is that they just weren't trying to win by a large margin because it was a weaker field. She was controlling the pace up front, and because she set a slow pace, she couldn't run a fast final time. Do you have any thoughts about the speed figure last time, and how do you assess her chances coming into this Cotillion against a tougher group?
That's exactly the note that I made. I think her last race speed figure is largely a factor of the pace. She went really slow. She was kind of gifted the lead. There was no other speed in there. And I just think she's still capable to be that 120-plus filly that we saw in the Acorn. I'm not even convinced she's a horse that wants to be on the lead. I think she just kind of was there by default in that last time out, and I think she's going to take the rating nicely. We don't have this in the pace projector flagged as a race with a hot pace, but I'm not going to be surprised if that happens. We have Serengeti Empress, who we know how fast she is. I mean, she was super fast in the test. She took the Kentucky Oaks wire to wire. And then we have Jaywalk drawn on the far outside. And I would hope by this point her connections have to realize she's a horse that just has to be up front. She's not the same filly when she doesn't make the lead. So I assume she's going to go. And then we have Jeltrin, who just exploded last time out of Delaware. And it would be hard to imagine they would change her tactics. So I don't think we're going to get in any way is Serengeti Empress going to have it easy. I think Arana is going to be able to sit a few lengths off of those. And unfortunately, she's the morning line favorite and probably will be the post-time favorite. But I do really think she is the horse to beat in here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. She's the most likely winner. She is the deserving favorite in this race. I do think that this might be a spot where you could take a shot against her, whereas I didn't think that last time in the Coaching Club American Oaks, where she just seemed to have that field over a barrel because there was no other speed in the race. This time, I mean, she's going to have her running shoes on because Serengeti Empress has really improved, even since she won the Kentucky Oaks back in May. I know she lost by 6 lengths to Guarana in the Acorn, but she was setting just a torrid pace that day, and Guarana was sitting a couple of lengths off it. I really thought she ran well in that race. And then last time out in the test, I mean, she and Kofefi just are throwing down the kind of speed figures that even the older horses can't really touch at this point. So I do think that Serengeti Empress has really upped her game probably since she last faced Guarana. And she's drawn the rail. They've got to go to the front. I am a little concerned, as you were saying, that there is other speed in this field. I mean, I'm even concerned about a horse like Collegeville Girl, assuming that she runs here. She's a long shot in this race, but I don't know why the heck Connections would run a horse like that in this race if they're not trying to make a lead with her. She's a dirt sprinter. I don't think she'll be around for more than 5 furlongs, but she's a horse that could have an impact on this race. So I'm a little reticent to take Serengeti Empress on top, even though I do think on some level, in terms of ability, there's not as big of a gap between her and Guarana as some might assume. So I'm using both of these horses, probably in equal strength. I'm going to take a shot with Street Band again. I know that she looks a little bit slower than the 2 top contenders, but I just feel like she's one of these horses that has really stepped forward since the springtime. She just got that nightmare trip at the Kentucky Oaks when she was out of position and wide the entire way. I liked her Indiana Oaks score. You know, she wasn't beating much, kind of like Mr. Money in the other Colt race, but I liked the way she did it. And then last time out in the Alabama, I'm not certain she really wants to go a mile and a quarter. She got there at the 8th pole and just kind of couldn't go with Dunbar Road at the end of that race, but she almost beat Point of Honor for second. And I just feel like Street Band is really stepping forward in the second half of the year for Larry Jones. And I just feel like she's going to trip out in this race because she'll probably be sitting behind those 2 aforementioned fillies and other speeds like Jaywalk. And if she's 3rd or 4th early, I think she can make that move to challenge at the top of the stretch. I'm just hoping that she wants the distance a little bit more than the other 2. I realize she's not the most likely winner, but she's going to be a price in this race. So she's the value play that I'd go for if I was taking a shot against the 2 favorites in the cotillion.
Yes, I'd have no problem with her, assuming she's going to be in the 6 to 8 to 1 range. That's just a guess, but I think it's pretty solid. I had her and Horologist are the ones most likely to could be running late and maybe pose the biggest threat. I do want to mention the biggest. I'm not a big bounce guy at all, but I really do worry about that a little bit with Serengeti Empress being drawn inside and coming out of that huge test. That was just a really big effort for 3-year-old fillies and jumping right back in against these just top-notch fillies. These are the best horses in the division. So I do worry about that a little bit as well with her. I do want to touch on Bellafina. I'm sure she's going to take some money at the window. That might even help the price on Street Band, but I've just kind of written her off. I've not been a fan all year, and I'm just going to ride that horse until it beats me because I just don't think she's the same filly we saw as a 2-year-old. I don't think she's developed at all. And from what I'm reading, still quite a few people seem to like her, and I'm just not a fan.
Yeah, they're adding the blinkers for this race. We'll see if that makes any difference. I probably foolishly took a shot with her in the test last time, and I mean, I don't know why they shipped her for that race because she just didn't look like she was ready to run. She couldn't keep up early, and she just kind of got 3rd by default because others fell apart chasing that insanely fast pace. I didn't like that performance at all, and based on her 2-year-old form, 7 furlongs was supposed to be maybe her ideal distance. So I can't possibly take her in this race. I hope she bounces back and runs better because she was a really good horse at one time, but she's not a horse that I could ever bet in a race like this. Moving on to the other 3-year-old race at Parx on Saturday, the Gallant Bob sprinting for the 3-year-old colts and geldings going 6 furlongs. A lot of horses shipping in for this race, 2 main players from California, those being Landeskog and King Jack. I would assume King Jack is going to be the favorite due to the fact that he was second to Improbable last time in that very fast shared belief stakes. He's cutting back in distance. Landeskog is actually stretching out a little bit from a win going 5.5 furlongs. Did you think it was mostly these 2 horses? Did you prefer one or the other?
No, I actually am kind of siding with the pace projector in here. It's predicted to be a fast pace. There's 2 horses we give a running style label of leaders, another 2 with speed, and it's only from a field of 9. So I'm probably going to look for a little off the pace horse in here. I'll get to that in a second. I do want to talk about Bulletin, who's your Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint winner. He's one of those who could show some speed, and you're more of a breeding expert than me, but as I looked over his pedigree and looked at some of his siblings, it doesn't seem like he should have any problem with the dirt. Of course, you never know till you try it, but I'm kind of leaning towards a horse Trophy Chaser in here. This is a horse who ran some really nice races as a 2-year-old, and early in January as a 3-year-old. He was second in one of those early preps at Gulfstream, early Derby preps. and he ran a 116 back then. He laid off until recently, and he came back with a 114. And he just has a look of a horse to me that has a nice forward move in him. And I think with the hot pace set up, he has tactical speed, but he certainly doesn't have to be on the lead. I think he's a horse that can hang with these, and especially he's going to be a very nice price, I would assume.
I hope we have a few more disagreements in the upcoming races, because we see this race pretty much the same way. I like Trophy Chaser too. My thing with this horse is I feel like they've been running him longer distances, going a mile, 7 furlongs, and I really think the 6 furlongs might just be perfect for him. And as you were alluding to, he's one of the few horses that has shown the ability to pass others, whereas Landeskog just seems like one that really needs the lead. Bulletin, I know he's running only turf races, but I've never seen him run by another horse. I think he needs the lead too. And some others who we didn't mention, like Strong Will, both of Larry Ravelli's horses Get Hammered, even Bethlehem Roads, are all just need the lead types. And it just seems like this pace has to be pretty hot. I don't want to see Trophy Chaser coming from 7th or 8th place, and I guess that's a possibility given how much speed is in here. But, I mean, it's not like he's slow either. I think he'll get a stalking trip, and I'm not sure what to make of his last race because you've got a number of horses running new career top speed figures there, so I'm always a little skeptical of races like that. That's the case for both the Timeform number and the Buyer. But it seems like a legitimately fast race looking at the other races on that card. I know Trophy Chaser got tired at the end, but that was going 7 furlongs off the layoff. I just think he's got a right to step forward. So we're on the same page here. As for Bulletin, I guess I kind of hope he takes money in this race because on the surface of things, he does have enough dirt pedigree. He's actually a half brother to Tiz Miz Sue, who was a grade 1 winner routing on the dirt. It's just, I feel like these moves from turf to dirt don't work out that often when the horse was originally turf meant, especially for a trainer like Todd Pletcher, who is one that usually gives them a chance on the dirt first time out. So I just didn't love that. I guess he drew a good post outside of horses, but if he's going to take money in here, I wanted to try to beat him and just really use Trophy Chaser over the 2 California horses, Landeskog and King Jack.
Yeah, I think we're together. I'm sure this won't continue, but we're on the same page there. And I totally agree with you about Bulletin. I'm a fan of his. I was on his bandwagon last year, but it seems like they're kind of reaching now. They tried him going long. Now they're trying dirt. So it just seems like they're kind of trying to find something else for him because he hasn't been winning as of late. But we'll see how it turns out. But I'm looking for a big one from Trophy Chaser.
Okay, so we're pretty much on the same page on the Parx races. Let's move it to Belmont Park. We're going to take a look at one stakes race from Saturday and one from Sunday. There are a few stakes races on the Saturday card. The one that really interests me is the Kelso. We've got a lot of contenders in this race. I think there are some shorter prices that aren't totally trustworthy. The horse that I made the morning line favorite is Prince Lucky, and I don't think there's any doubt that if Prince Lucky runs his best race, he's probably going to beat this field. It's just he's a difficult horse to assess because sometimes he runs well, and sometimes he just doesn't run at all. And it's hard to know what you're going to get from him from race to race. How do you look at Prince Lucky? Is he just the best horse in here, or is he a horse that you're a little skeptical of at a short price?
I'm definitely skeptical. This is a race we actually gave the no speed label. And, I think it's worked out pretty well, that new label, but I'm not sure it's going to work out here. We will see. But part of that is just because of Prince Lucky. He's so erratic that he's not getting that up close rating that he actually runs when he's at his best. So, if he shows up, he's probably going to get an easy lead, but at a short price. He's not a horse that I'm willing to jump behind. This was a horse when I looked at it, I would say virtually every horse in this field has somewhere in their PPs races that could win. They all have TimeformUS speed figures somewhere fairly recently of 120 or above. And it looks like a pretty strong race. I do want to mention Monongahela, who's entered here, is also cross-entered at Parx. So you'll have to monitor whether he's going to show up at here or at Parx. My guess would be Parx, but we never know. It looks like that race might have came up easier and be a bit bigger, better spot for him. But of some of the others, I think Pat on the Back's going to be a short price. I'm definitely skeptical of him. He seems to be a terror with New York breds, but against open company, despite running big speed figures, he's 0 for 6 in his career. He's never been able to get it done. Now, some of those times he was obviously outclassed, and a few of them came earlier in his career at the fairgrounds. But at a short price, I don't want to try to get him to win his first time out against open. and not facing New York breds.
Yeah, Prince Lucky for me, I think so. I think there are two ways to look at Prince Lucky. One is that he's run well 3 times this year and he's run poorly 2 times. I guess, sure, because he's won 3 times. I feel like, though, he ran really well off the layoff in that Hal's Hope. His Gulfstream Park Mile was okay. He got the job done, but it was just an uncompetitive race and he didn't have to run a fast time to win it. And last time out in the state dinner, I know we got another respectable speed figure, but that wasn't the best stakes race. And he just got to lope along on what was a pretty moderate pace. I know people are going to see the 22 and 45 and think that was a fast pace. I'd advise you to look at the TimeformUS pace figures, which kind of standardize the pace for how the track was playing that day and just generally at Belmont. And it really was a moderate pace. It wasn't anywhere near fast. And that's, I think, what gave Prince Lucky the advantage. And also, horses just had not come out of that state dinner to really suggest it was quite as strong as the speed figure might indicate. So I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of Prince Lucky. I guess he can win. I just feel like this is a spot where you want to play against a horse like him. I respect Pat on the Back a little more than you do. I guess I'm just partial to the New York breds, but he really ran well in that Commentator 2 back. And I know it was a New York bred field, but Giant Expectations, the horse that he beat, is an open company horse. I mean, he just happens to be running in a New York bred race, but Giant Expectations is a graded stakes type of horse that Pat on the Back beat there. And last time out at Saratoga, number 1, 6 furlongs is probably just a little bit short of Pat on the Back's best distance. And also, that was another day where the rail was dead. And for whatever reason, Dylan Davis sent him to the lead and right over to the rail at about the 3/8 pole. And you just couldn't do that on that August 9th card. And I think that really cost Pat on the Back arguably the victory that day. So I think Pat on the Back's getting back to his best distance. And I do think he's pretty competitive with this group. I'd also use Plainsman. I'm not quite sure that he's good enough, but his last race does feel like it was just a prep for Shug going the 7 furlongs. He should be better going the mile. My top pick, though, is True Timber. I don't totally trust him off the layoff. That's a concern because Kieran McLaughlin does not have the greatest numbers off layoffs, especially in dirt routes. But this horse got deceptively good last year. He ran that allowance race at Belmont where he beat Pattern Recognition, came back later and had a tough trip in that Bold Ruler behind No Dozing. He would have finished much closer that day. Then in the Cigar Mile, I mean, he finished ahead of Pat on the Back, who's one of the top contenders in this race. And I think if he repeats that Cigar Mile, he's arguably more likely to win than Prince Lucky. I know that he's coming off 2 poor efforts. I think he had excuses both times. He's reportedly training well coming back into this race. He's got some tactical speed, and I think he'll be a bit of a price due to the layoff. So I'm just going to take a shot with True Timber.
Yeah, mine in here that this wasn't even a race I sent originally on our rundown because just from a betting standpoint, I wasn't a huge fan of it. But if I had to go with someone, I'd probably go with Plainsman just because he ran pretty fast last time out behind Uncontested, who had an easy lead most of the way. He was the only horse really making up ground. And as you said, it kind of looked like a prep. But this is a race where I'm just going to be looking at the board, see if I think anybody sneaks up maybe higher than they should be. But not a super huge fan of betting in this one. And I have no problem with True Timber taking a shot with him either. But like you, I don't want much part of Prince Lucky at what'll probably be a very short price.
Yeah, and just to mention, for multi-race purposes, because I think both of us do play multi-race bets from time to time, this will be the kind of race where I'd really press True Timber, Pat on the Back, and Plainsman and sort of try to get Prince Lucky out of there. Although I do acknowledge he can win, I just don't think he's going to create any value. So I would lean on those horses, and True Timber is probably the best price of them, though I do have a lot of respect for Plainsman as well. On Sunday's card at Belmont, you've got a couple of New York bred stakes on the turf. It looks like 55 is going to be the big favorite in the, I believe it's the John Hettinger, the other division of this race. But the Ashley T. Cole for the horses and geldings, I think it's a pretty interesting group. Years past, we had horses like Lubash and Kincresa and Garapa just sort of ruling this division. These days, I guess the elder statesman of the group is Offering Plan, who just seems to always be competitive in these races. He won the West Point last time, but I think the horse to beat is probably Gucci Factor on the outside because he achieved the feat of actually beating a graded stakes field last time in the poker. Took the summer off, coming off a bit of a layoff, stretching out to the 9 furlongs. I guess they're the two favorites, but I thought this was a pretty wide open race.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Voodoo Song is very clearly going to make the lead. He seems to have a bit of a following, but he's been so bad this year. I just can't take him seriously in here. I think he'll set an honest, legitimate pace. He's going to have that easy lead, and it won't shock me if he were to keep going, but he's a horse I'm not going to be interested in betting at all. And I think it basically comes down to the top two from the West Point, I believe it was, and Gucci Factor. So we're talking Dot Matrix, Offering Plan, and Gucci Factor. And like you, I think Gucci Factor is the horse to beat. He was in, really good form. He kind of skipped the Saratoga meet, which is maybe a little bit puzzling. They run plenty of New York bred stakes, but I'm not going to question Christophe Clement. If he's putting him in this spot, I'm going to assume he's ready. And I think he's probably the best horse of this group.
Yes, just to give some insight there, I had seen some interviews with Christophe Clement in past years about this horse, and he planned to skip Saratoga both last year and this year because he's a difficult horse to handle and just feels like the environment at Saratoga would really just unglue him. So he didn't want to just put the horse through that, so he intentionally kept him at Belmont throughout the entire summer for each of the last 2 years. So that was a planned layoff. So I wouldn't view that as a negative with Gucci Factor. My question with Gucci Factor is the 1.125 because I really feel like he's more of a good miling type, and I'm just wondering if this distance might just expose him a little bit because he couldn't quite get the job done in the same race last year going a 1.125. He's probably improved since then. Just at a short price, I wanted to sort of look elsewhere. I respect Offering Plan. I thought he was just pretty game to get the victory last time over Dot Matrix, who did hang a little bit at the end of that West Point. But the horse that I'm interested in is Red Knight. I know that on the surface of things, it looks like his form has just gone south, but you can really make a lot of excuses for his last three races. The dirt race last time, that's just not his best surface, so I don't care about that. The Bowling Green two-back, yes, he finished last, but if you watch that trip, he was just 3 to 4 wide around both turns. I don't know what the plan was, but his jockey just never got him into a good spot. And it's really not surprising he didn't run well given that trip. And then 3-back, going the 2 miles. I mean, he can handle a 2-mile distance, but Jose Ortiz just seemed to have some trouble restraining him early on as they were going quite slowly early. And Red Knight just sort of ran off on him and made this premature move on the backstretch, which is not something you can do going a distance like that. Prior to that, he'd been in really good form. He probably wants to go a little farther than 1.125, unlike some others who don't want to go as far as this. But I feel like he's improved enough this year that he's got the class to handle New York breds getting back to this division. So I'm going to take a shot with Red Knight, and I feel like due to that poor recent form, he might be a price in this race.
Yeah, you make some good points there. He's probably a horse I overlooked and probably did a bit of lazy handicapping on him just looking at the figures. So some good points there, and I'll reevaluate him. Maybe I'll consider using him. You swayed me.
Let's move on to Laurel, where they've actually got a card of stakes races on Saturday and some nice races there. I think their feature is probably the DeFrancis Memorial Dash. I believe that's the only graded stakes event they're running on Saturday. And this race drew a pretty interesting field. We'll see how the public bets this race because I think that's sort of up in the air. I'm not really sure who the horse to beat necessarily is. The horse that I think is the most likely winner is Killybegs Captain. I know he's not the favorite on the line, but he was third behind Mitoli and Firenze Fire in the Forgo last time. And prior to that, he had some big excuses. I mean, he completely blew the break in the John Mayrude, 3-back behind Promises Fulfilled, and he actually ran a remarkable race to be third that day. And then 2-back in the Tail of the Cat. That was the same race where I was saying that Pat on the Back was compromised by being on the dead rail. And if Killybegs Captain was on the rail for even longer than Pat on the Back in that race. So that was just the complete wrong trip for him that day. Just feel like John Terranova's gotten this horse into really good form. 6 furlongs is fine for him, and he can stalk a little bit in a race that has speed. I just thought Killybegs Captain made a ton of sense in this race.
He did. Just before I start, the other race we're about to talk about is also a grade 3, the Baltimore, Washington, whatever, international something or other. Turf Cup, I think it is. But, yeah, we landed on the same horse again, unfortunately. That's what I say. He looks like he's ready for a breakout to me, Killybegs Captain in this spot. I think there's a good amount of speed, so it should be a solid pace, but I don't think anything that's going to sway who wins or loses this race. And like you said, I really like some of his last few races. I thought he ran really good in the Forgo against Matoli and Firenze Fire. He ran good in that race where you said at Saratoga, where he was just down on that bad rail. And, he actually ran way better than I expected him that day after seeing the trip that he got. And I think this drop in company is one that's going to make him just a really strong contender in here. And as you say, the morning line, he's 9-2, and I suspect we're going to get something like that. I'm a little, He Hate Me is the morning line favorite. I thought he got a dream trip that same day. He was on the lead, but he was outside. He was about 3 wide all the way around, and he still couldn't hold off Bone Raison, who's also in here. And that horse also has a run as well. He's actually run a couple times already since that day, and hasn't, with not so great results. I mean, he's run okay, I think, but he hasn't won either time. He finished second last time to Engage, a horse who probably wouldn't be one of the favorites in here, I wouldn't think. So we're on the same horse in Killybegs Captain. I said He Hate Me is a morning line favorite. He's actually not. It's New York Central, who's 5-2, but I'm just not a fan of that horse. He seems to kind of go in and out. He's really unreliable, in my opinion, and it seems like whenever he steps up into better company like he's facing here, he does not get the job done.
Yeah, I'm no expert on how they bet races at Laurel, but I kind of felt like Killybegs Captain might be the favorite in this race. I just think he makes too much sense. I think that 9-2 might be a bit of a fantasy, but we'll see. I hope we get a price like that. I didn't really get New York Central at all. I don't have a whole lot positive to say about him. I just want to quickly mention, as you were saying, Bon Raison. I'm not sure that I love him in this race, but he is one of my favorite horses because he is just an iron horse who's making his 16th start of the year in September. You just don't see that anymore. And this trainer switch, I believe this is he's the same owner that he's had all along, who is now training his own horses, whereas Carlos Martin was training for him in the past. So it's not I don't think it's an owner switch. But he's run one since the Forger already, which was less than a month ago. So just a really cool horse. He needs some pace, though. We'll see how much he gets in here. But I just thought Killybegs Captain made a lot of sense, and I would use him over He Hate Me for all the reasons you mentioned, as well as Bone Raison. The other race that you correctly pointed out was a Grade 3 event from Laurel is the Baltimore-Washington International Turf Cup. Quite a name. Kind of like the Grand Prix American Jockey Club Invitational they ran at Belmont a couple of days ago. Just rolls off the tongue. This race features the return of one of my favorite horses from last year, Glorious Empire. I really thought he was one of the best turf horses, best American turf horses that we saw run in this country last year, as he won the Sword Dancer and beat a very good field at the end of the year in the Fort Lauderdale. The question, obviously, is, what do we get from him off the layoff? Is this just a prep for something down the line? And do you want to take him at a short price?
I don't personally. Nothing against the horse, as you said. I think he's good. But it just looks like a prep to me. It's probably at a distance too short for him. And he has been off quite a while. I think it's been almost over 9 months off of that Grade 2 win at Gulfstream Park. He won the Fort Lauderdale really easily. So I suspect it's just a prep. I'm going to lean on the pace projector in here. McKagan looks like he's going to get an easy lead. I think it's kind of hard to argue that. He seems to be in top form. My one reservation is Laurel's kind of a big wide turf course. He's a horse that really seems to like the tighter courses at times, but I'm hoping his pace advantage can over and that he'll be long gone before the others make their run.
Yeah, I really do respect McKagan. And I think people might look at his last race and say, oh, he broke the track record at Saratoga. He just suddenly improved for Jason Service. He had never shown that kind of form before. And I think people forget sometimes that McKagan used to be a really good horse who was capable of running some pretty big speed figures going these 1 mile distances on the turf. And I know that his form was not the best for a couple of seasons, but I mean, he just got back to one of his good efforts last time. And frankly, he did not have the easiest pace setups in his prior 2 races. You see some of those red color-coded pace figures in his PPs, and even 3-back, he ran a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure, which, even though that was just a claiming race, it makes him competitive here. So I think McKagan is very sensible. I do wonder how much pressure Glorious Empire can apply, because I know the pace projector has him back in third. He's a one-dimensional speed horse. It's just he does that in longer races, and it's sometimes a mystery how that is going to translate to these shorter races. We'll see if they try to make the lead with him. The same goes for the Up the Ante, who just sets paces in slower-paced races. He's not really a speed horse going the kind of fractions that McKagan sets. So we'll see how that all shakes out on the front end. But it does seem like McKagan's going to make the lead here. He's one of two horses that I would use, along with Frontier Market. Maybe a situation where you get a square price on a Chad Brown horse because he's making a stakes debut coming out of some allowance races. He's a horse that has sort of been one of those perennial maidens going back to the middle of 2018. But I really liked his final allowance race back in October of 2018, where he beat a next out winner and just showed a really strong turn of foot in the stretch that day, going the mile. His first start this year, he probably needed. I thought he stepped forward last time, closing into a pretty slow pace. And I just feel like if McKagan does what McKagan usually does and just sort of runs off on the front end, maybe he gets a little bit leg weary late, and a closer like Frontier Market can catch him vulnerable in the final eighth of a mile. But for me, it's about using these two horses.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. He overcame that slow pace. We had the half mile coated in blue last time. He was well back in next to last in an 8-horse field and was able to overcome it. So he certainly needs to be respected.
All right. The final stakes race we're going to talk about this week is the Charlestown Oaks, as we head out to see the feature race at Charlestown, going the 2 turns 7 furlongs there. Interesting configuration. A lot of these horses are shipping into Charlestown and trying this sort of bull ring distance for the first time. We've got one horse, the local horse, Parisian Diva, who's won 7 times at Charlestown, but she looks up to be a little bit up against it from a speed figure standpoint in this race. I don't know where to start in this race because the horse that I think is the horse to beat is actually a big price in the morning line, and I kind of don't really see it. Irish Mischief, who has coming off 2 pretty impressive speed figures. I know they're out of town in Kentucky, but she's got good speed. I think she's going to be forwardly placed here for a trainer, Brad Cox, who can just win anywhere. I kind of thought she was the horse to beat in this race.
Yeah, I agree with you. The very first thing I wrote in here was the morning line looks a bit at me for some of the horses, and she was one of the prime candidates there. I don't think there's any way in the world she's going to be 8-1, but she's the horse I like the best in here. I love her tactical speed, which is really important at Charlestown. Charlestown, even though I've only been once in probably the last decade, is still probably the track I've been to more than all others that I've been to in my life. I mean, I just spent so many days there as a young budding horse player. So, I mean, I know that track well. You got to have early speed. It's a 3-turn race. I'm sure most people don't know that or know that, but just for those that don't. And, you know, I think between Irish Mischief I like, and I also like Newly Minted, who we talked about on our Pacecast before, when she ran that nice 1:10 TimeformUS speed figure at a distance that's probably a little too long for her, but against a field she just could beat anyway. I think the turnback's going to hit her right between the eyes for Linda Rice. So the 2 I really like are both. It's Irish Mischief and Newly Minted, and that's the only 2. Nobody else in here really drew my attention. Maybe the morning line favorite, Fashion Faux Pas, will wind up being the favorite. But I don't really like the turnback for her coming off the route races. I know she sprinted well in the past, but it tend to get your speed dulled a little bit going that long. And her last race, when we talked to when she ran against Geltrin, she just kind of took a funny step and got eased out, and it was a really weird race to watch. So the turnback kind of worries me a little bit, and at a short price, I'm going to be against her.
Yeah, we see this race very similarly. I like Newly Minted probably the most over Irish Mischief. You know that I've been a big fan of Newly Minted all along. And I think the TimeformUS speed figure that the Fleet Indian earned really highlights how well she ran in that race, because it was a pretty fast pace early. And I know that the final eighth of a mile was on the slow side, and that's why the final time wasn't that fast. But she really deserves credit for the work that she did early on, the fact that she kept running on in a race where the others just stopped. So I think that 110 that she earned there makes her very competitive here. And like you were saying, I like the turn back to 7 furlongs, and I think she's got the bottom to go the 2 turns after her last race. And she's got that speed you need to have at Charlestown. So I just think Newly Minted makes a ton of sense. And also, Linda Rice shipped a horse in to win this race about 2 or 3 years ago with Hot City Girl. So she can certainly do this. And I'm using her with Irish Mischief. And the other horse I would throw in is Parisian Diva, the local Charlestown horse. I know I said she's a little bit slower than some of these, but sometimes experience over this kind of course, it counts for something. And she did run a decent race at Laurel behind the very good Please Flatter Me 3-back. So she does have some quality to her. I wouldn't totally discount her. I'm just not a big fan of the others. I didn't really know what to do with Fashion Faux Pas for all the reasons that you mentioned. She's just kind of hard to trust. And her 2 big efforts came at Delaware recently when she earned those speed figures. And Delaware can be kind of a weird course sometimes. So maybe she just can't bring that form elsewhere. I don't know what the story is with her, but I just think Newly Minted and Irish Mischief might be the 2 best horses in this race.
Yeah, one thing I'd say as somebody that, like I said, spent many nights at Charlestown is a horse like Parisian Diva, you got to be careful. That's a horse you'd normally, if you're a vertical player and you play tries and supers, that you would think a horse like her whose speed might spit the bit a little bit and back out through the field. At Charlestown, with the short run and the stretch, they tend to stick around. So just because he's a speed horse, maybe if you don't think she can win, those kinds still stick around and pick up pieces at that track.
That's a good point. We've seen that quite a bit. Horses coming into the stretch of the lead at Charlestown. I imagine they have a pretty good record. So those are all the stakes races we wanted to discuss this week. I hope we can make some scores, and we'll catch up with all these races when we come back for the typical Tuesday TimeformUS Pacecast to recap these races and probably many more, including some non-stakes races. So we agreed a lot this week. Hopefully we have some more disagreements in the future, but I thought this was pretty fun, Craig.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and we got the prime part of the racing season for me. I mean, as much as I love the 3-year-olds and the build-up to the Triple Crown, it's probably 5 times as much the Breeders' Cup. As a betting guy, I think the Breeders' Cup is the day I enjoy the most. The 2 days now, but just an unbelievable challenge to handicap all those races, and we get everything we want as horse players. So I'm really looking forward to the build-up, and hopefully this TimeformUS Forecast will be something people will enjoy, and I think it's really going to be fun the next 6 weeks.
And I imagine we'll be talking about all of those prep races for the Breeders' Cup on this show and also the TimeformUS Pacecast. So a lot of content to look forward to. As always, you can listen to all of the DRF podcasts on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum on any of those channels. And make sure to listen to us here at the TimeformUS Forecast, as well as on the TimeformUS Pacecast, which will be out on Tuesday. So thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll be back at you with another episode of the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.